Hello, and welcome to our discussion on the new law that has made recreational usage of marijuana for adults legal. I'm looking forward to discussing with you how this may impact employers like yourself and what you should be considering at this time. So during our time together today, we're going to be covering the following topics. First, we will do an overview of the background checks in general and drug testing options, do an overview of the new law, talk about how the new law may impact the culture of your organization or even the hiring practices, and talk a little bit about the importance of hiring statistics as well. We will look at what options you have as employers with this new law, talk about some other things to be considering when making a decision on how best to move forward, and then finally go through some question and answers. So let's start by doing a general overview of the laws that impact how we can perform background checks on our employees or our applicants. The first law is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, also known as the FCRA. This law restricts how consumer reporting agencies and employers can collect and report on information, and it restricts the ways in which employers can use that information for hiring purposes. In the FCRA, there is a 7-year look-back provision, and this prohibits the reporting of certain information that is 7 years older or more. So what's not allowed is to report on arrest not resulting in convictions, liens, collections, civil judgments, or bankruptcies that are at least 7 years old. There is one exception to this 7-year look-back period, and those are for jobs paying salaries of $75,000 or more. The time restriction also does not apply to any criminal convictions, which can be reported for any time as long as doing so also complies with state laws. The FCRA also states that before conducting a background check, the employer must provide the applicant with a standalone disclosure form stating that a background check may be requested. The applicant must then be given written authorization for the employer to obtain that background check information. If a background check reveals negative information, employers must adhere to a 2-step adverse action process before a final hiring decision is made. So if the employer decides that they're going to consider either terminating an employee or not hiring an applicant based on the background check results, they must provide 2 documents to that candidate or employee. The first is a copy of the background check that was relied upon, and the second is a summary of the applicant's rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So these documents must be provided before taking any adverse employment action. So this is called the pre-adverse action process. And this allows an employee or an applicant to dispute information that has appeared on their background check. Now, you may be wondering, why would I want to allow someone to dispute this information? In this day and age with identity theft, there is a real possibility that information provided through a background check is not related to the person in question. I actually had a previous manager whose son was applying for his first job out of college, and when the employer was running his background information, items appeared that were not related to her son. If he had not been provided the opportunity to clear his name, he would have not been able to be hired with the company or to correct his background check report going forward. If you utilize background checks, I highly recommend that you work with an HR professional or an employment attorney if you have something come back that is making you question how you want to move forward with that candidate. So some additional requirements to be thinking about as well. Depending on the circumstances, the employer may need to take further steps after making that final decision to move forward with either not hiring the candidate or terminating an employee. So you must notify the applicant or employee of the adverse action that's going to be taken based on the background check. Provide them the contact details of the consumer reporting agency, and then explain to them the reason for the adverse action. It's also important to explain to them that the consumer reporting agency did not make this decision and can really not provide specific reasons. And then inform the applicant that they can request a free copy of the background report and dispute any inaccuracies. So by being an employer that adheres to the FCRA, it ensures that your applicants receive a fair chance in the hiring process. And it also promotes a safe work environment for all of your employees. So the next law to be aware of is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So according to this, you cannot discriminate against a protected class within the hiring process. So you need to ensure that your practices are not having any adverse impact on a protected group of individuals. So when you're looking at what background checks you may want to run, as well as decisions about what you're going to do with those results, you really want to make sure that you're asking yourself, is this job related? For example, I have clients that will request that we run a credit check on a candidate prior to them being hired. My first question to them is, how does their credit history relate to the work that they will be performing for your company? Now, in some scenarios, this may apply, for example, with a CFO, head of finance, something like that. But for someone that is not dealing with the finances of the company, this would be something that I would highly encourage my clients to avoid. So you want to make sure that you're also looking at any protected classes under Ohio laws, because state laws have a tendency to expand some of those protected classes beyond what the federal laws provide. So what typically appears on a background check? So this information definitely can vary based on the consumer reporting agency that you utilize, but typical information that is reported is going to be a case number, an arrest date, the actual charge or charges that are on the background, the disposition of those charges, date of that disposition, the severity of the charge, so whether it was a misdemeanor or a felony, and then the sentence that that individual received. So then you can access this information and again, make a determination on whether or not this information really impacts their ability to do their job. So some other common background checks other than criminal that tend to be performed are employment verifications and education verifications. So with employment verifications, what you're looking to do is confirm past employment information that's provided by candidates. So you're looking for employment dates held at each company, and then titles or positions that may have been held by that individual as well. And then for education verifications, you're looking to verify the educational information reported by that candidate. So you're going to be able to verify the educational institution that they attended, their attendance dates for each of those, and then any degree certifications or diplomas that they earned while attending. So now let's move on to the topic of drug testing. So as the regulations in Ohio stand today, Ohio employers are allowed to drug test applicants and new hires. Ohio employers are authorized to drug test employees in a variety of circumstances, including following a workplace accident, a test based on reasonable suspicion, or pre-employment. So what is the new law and how might it impact your organization? So effective November 7th, 2023, the state became the 24th state to legalize adult use of marijuana recreationally. While Ohio has legalized recreational marijuana, it still does remain illegal at the federal level. So this is something that you may have to navigate, is kind of this dual legal landscape, and understand any obligations you may have under both state and federal laws. It's very important at this time to be reviewing and updating any existing workplace policies that you have that address marijuana usage in the workplace. So consider any policies that you have that are related to drug testing, impairment on the job, as well as employee conduct. It is important to consult any legal experts or HR professionals to ensure that your policies align with state regulations and also protect the company's interests. Now, employers can establish and enforce drug testing policies even though this has become legal. These policies may still prohibit cannabis use during working hours and should address what would happen if the employee is under the influence while on the job. You should document clear guidelines for drug testing procedures, including reasonable suspicion and post-accident testing. It's also important that you're educating your employees about the company's stance on recreational marijuana. Clarify what the expectations are regarding use, possession, and even impairment during working hours. You also want to make sure that you're prioritizing workplace safety. So employees that are in safety sensitive positions, so machinery operators, drivers, obviously should not be impaired by marijuana. And you may want to have different set of rules for those individuals as well. It's going to be important that you're training your supervisors on how to recognize signs of impairment and handle reasonable suspicion situations appropriately. Ohio also allows medical marijuana usage, so employers should be aware of reasonable accommodations that may come about for employees with valid medical marijuana cards. So I would say consult legal counsel or partner with your HR department to navigate the intersection of medical and recreational marijuana laws if it does come up in your organization. So how might this change in the law and the decision that you make as an employer of how to move forward impact your workplace culture? Now, when it comes to culture, I think you first need to make sure that you have a firm understanding of what your current culture is. There are companies that tend to be more conservative and others that are more liberal, and they're going to make decisions based on that culture. And I don't think that this scenario will be or should be any different. Companies are going to have to make some decisions on if they want to make any changes to their policies and practices in their organization, or if they will just want to continue on with what has worked for them in the past. So taking a look at your current workforce, as well as your turnover numbers, is going to be an important statistic to understand. So if you're currently struggling to keep talent and having a hard time attracting talent, and your competitors are changing their policies to potentially expand their talent pool, then this law could have some form of impact on your organization. So when determining what direction you will move in, you should consider the balance between safety concerns and employee privacy. So for example, you may want to consider if rather than testing for general use, you focus on detecting impairment in the workplace. Now, a challenge here is cannabis can linger in the system. So this makes drug testing less reliable for active impairment purposes. Drug testing policies can have an impact on employee morale and trust. Employees may perceive strict testing as intrusive or discriminatory. So companies need to foster a culture that promotes safety while respecting individual rights and privacy. And that's why it's so important to have a good understanding of what your current company culture is and where you want your company culture to go, and then make decisions on these policies and practices that will help you either get there or maintain the current company culture that you have. So how might these changes impact your hiring strategy and results? So if you decide to keep testing for marijuana in your hiring process and your competitor decides to take it out of their panel of drugs that they're testing for, this could cause some individuals to seek employment at your competitor versus with you. Remember that word does travel fast between job seekers. But the opposite could also be true for you. So if you decide to remove marijuana from the panel of drugs that you test for, and your competitor decides to keep it, then that could encourage some, definitely not all, of those applicants to consider seeking employment with you rather than your competitor. As I'm sure you are aware of, it is a really tough market out there for employers right now already, with there being more jobs open and available than applicants, than there physically are people to fill them. Employers are really having to figure out how best to increase the talent pool and bring top talent to their organizations. So again, the approach here could really depend on if the organization is having challenges now or not. If you are already having challenges, then this may be something that you want to look at a bit harder than an organization that is not having any challenges with retaining or attracting top talent. Or you should at least make sure that you are tracking how this law is impacting your organization and collecting some data so that you can then make an educated decision about how best to move forward in the future. As more states legalize recreational marijuana, companies are reevaluating some of their drug testing policies and then having to decide if pre-employment testing of cannabis is something that they want to consider. So what are your options? So I would say kind of overall, you have 3 different options that you can start considering on how you want to move forward. So option 1 would be keep your policies the same as they are today and see what happens. Option 2, wait until you see what everyone else does and see what impact it has on their organization by what decisions they make, and by kind of staying the course right now, what impact it has on your organization. And then if you decide to make a change at a later point, you can do so. And then option 3 would be to remove either THC from your drug panel for pre-employment testing or stop drug testing altogether, whatever is best for your organization. So I did some crowdsourcing of some HR professionals in my network that shared with me what they have done in states that have legalized recreational marijuana quite a few years ago. And honestly, the breakdown was pretty spread out. So 20% have remained the course even 5 years after the fact. 40% didn't change anything for quite a few years, but then since then, in the last couple of years, so over a 5-year span, they stopped testing for THC for pre-employment. And 40% changed their policies as soon as the law passed. Now, I wanted to look at this on a broader scale, not just that state where I have the group of HR professionals, So I put together some different legal resources that also conducted research on kind of more general population across the country. And it was surprising because the numbers were actually very different than what I saw with those organizations, which actually were located in the state of Michigan. So 60% of employers across the nation maintained their existing drug test policies. And they stated that these companies prioritize safety and consistency. That's why they made that determination. 30% waited a few years to revise their policies, and they observed the impact, what it had on their productivity, safety, and employee relations, and wanted to do more gradual adjustments, which allowed them to kind of find that balance between compliance and kind of reality and what worked best for their workforce. And then 10% stopped testing immediately. And for them, they recognized that marijuana's legal status had shifted and chose to align their policies accordingly. So outside of pre-employment testing, there are other considerations regarding testing that I think you should be thinking about when making a decision as well. So keep in mind that you will still have the option of testing someone for reasonable suspicion if you do remove it from your pre-employment testing policy. So if you have a reasonable suspicion that someone is under the influence of drugs or even alcohol for that matter, while on the job, you can document your reasonings and send them for testing. Now, you're also going to want to consider if you have any Department of Transportation positions that need to comply with those requirements, or have any federal contracts that need to be adhered to, because that will impact the decisions that you can make according to drug testing in the workplace. Again, you're going to want to review your current policies to determine if they cover everything you're looking to enforce at this time, as well as for how you want to move forward for pre-hire, reasonable suspicion, and post-accident drug testing procedures. It's also going to be important to have a communication plan in place to answer questions from your employees about your policies and why you're either keeping them as is or making changes with the new law. You have to remember, though, that you won't please everyone with your decision. This can be a very polarizing topic. So do what is best and right for your organization, and then be willing to monitor the situation and pivot if needed. Also important to keep in mind that testing for marijuana can be complicated. There's not a lot of research or guidance on what amount of marijuana consumed is considered intoxicated. So plus you can't necessarily test to determine if someone is under the influence at that moment, like you can with alcohol. So employers also should be considering what type of test they want to be utilizing. So different types of tests have different time frames of how long the THC has been in someone's system. So there can be saliva tests, urine tests, or even hair tests. So one thing that you may want to consider is treating marijuana usage the same as alcohol. Alcohol is legal, but employees are not authorized to be under the influence of alcohol while on the job. So the challenge here is what I mentioned before, though. The use of alcohol outside of the workplace doesn't usually impact test results of determining if someone is impaired in the moment, whereas marijuana usage would. So now let's go through some Q&A. So what triggers reasonable suspicion testing? So reasonable suspicion testing is initiated when a supervisor observes specific documentable signs that an employee may be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So these signs could relate to appearance, behavior, speech, body odors. There's a number of items here. even bloodshot eyes, erratic behavior, different things like that. But your managers should be trained in how to identify if someone is under the influence and have a clear understanding of what those physical signs and behaviors look like and what they should be looking for. I always recommend that a company have a reasonable suspicion checklist that is utilized, if at all possible, and a minimum of at least 2 members of management should observe and document the behaviors and signs separately or independently from each other. Now, when reasonable suspicion does arise, that trained supervisor should be the one making the decision to whether or not to conduct alcohol or drug testing, sending that individual for those tests. So it's very essential to document the observations and follow the procedure that you have set forth in your policies. Now, when should we perform post-accident testing? So post-accident testing occurs after a workplace accident or incident, and it really aims to determine whether alcohol or drugs played a role in the event. So it can be valuable data for accident investigations and for determining some usage patterns. So typically this would be done immediately after, but it could be anywhere within like 8 to 24 hours after the incident. But if there are any delays outside of that, that should also be documented. Now, if this is something that you're not currently doing, I would recommend that you work with your HR department or an employment attorney or a work comp attorney, just to make sure that you're doing this accurately. There can be some concerns that if you just do blanket drug testing after every accident, that you could deter employees from reporting accidents in the first place. So it's a very fine line that you want to be walking there and making sure that you're doing this appropriately. So what steps should we take before terminating an employee? So you're going to want to document those observations. Ensure that the supervisor's observations leading to that reasonable suspicion tests are very well documented. So utilizing that checklist. And then consult with your HR department or legal counsel to ensure that you are being compliant with any state and federal laws. Your policy should outline the consequences for a positive test result. So that way your supervisors and managers know what to do if this happens. So what if an employee refuses to take a test? If an employee does refuse to be tested or obstructs the process in any way, you should treat it as a positive test. Again, this should be listed out in your policies so that employees are aware of this ahead of time. And how can we avoid claims of discrimination? So I would say for the best thing for this, again, is making sure that we're documenting, that we have those independent observations, but also make sure that you're only utilizing a few employees, so maybe senior managers or HR that have been trained on this reasonable suspicion testing. It's so important to make sure that you're following your own company policies as well and not applying them arbitrarily or in any discriminatory fashion. So while employers may have the legal right to terminate an employee for a failed drug test, many companies do have policies that allow an employee to be referred to like a drug treatment program or counseling and have some sort of like second chance agreement for employees. So what are the consequences? So typically a positive result would, so what are the consequences if an applicant has a positive drug test? So typically a positive result would disqualify the applicant from the job, but the applicant can request to dispute or counter a positive drug test. So if they have a valid reason, so maybe taking medication that triggered a false positive, Making sure that you're working with a clinic that has a medical review officer that can address these situations is going to be important in that scenario. Will the failed test be on the applicant's permanent record? Not typically is this on an applicant's permanent record. And can the applicant reapply in the future? So I think this will be determined based on your company policy and what your stance is on this situation. So they could, yes, be terminated from consideration altogether. They could have the opportunity to attend rehab and reapply later, or retake the test at a later point. Now, if you have those like Department of Transportation positions, or any safety sensitive positions, you may want to have stricter or different rules for those as well. Now, how accurate are pre-employment drug tests? So we've talked about this a little bit. While these tests are easy to conduct, they can also yield false positives. So factors like medications or substances may affect these results. One way to make sure that you're able to like redo a test if something does come back is to talk to your clinic about doing a split sample. So they'll take that sample and split it into two, so then you can test that second sample as well if needed. So there are just some other hot HR trends at the moment that if you're not considering these, thinking about these, or they're not on your radar, I just wanted to share them with you so that you can start discussing them with your leadership team. So leadership and management development. So if you're not developing and continuing to provide education for your leaders and managers, it's so important to start looking at this. Regular feedback should be implemented. So performance evaluations can help identify some areas for improvement and development for your managers and leaders. But so can different surveys, like employee engagement surveys, identifying if your management team is engaged and if they're helping to lead an engaged workforce. By providing them the tools that they need to do their job, it's definitely going to help them and assist them in being able to lead that team appropriately. Org culture. So speaking of employee surveys, conducting employee surveys, focus groups, cultural assessments, trying to identify if there's any gaps between your actual culture today and your desired culture that you're looking to build. And then you can really develop action plans to address some of these areas of improvement, such as maybe promoting diversity, recognizing achievements for employees, and even enhancing work-life balance. HR technology is a very hot topic right now. If you're not currently utilizing some form of cloud-based HRIS, so human resource information system, now would be a great time to start looking for that. I talked a little bit about the importance of having data for your hiring. So your hiring stats, utilizing an applicant tracking system is going to help you get that data that you're looking for. Change management. So having a change management plan that includes clear communication channels. So how are you going to communicate? When are you going to communicate? To whom are you going to communicate? Having the right people engaged in that process from the beginning can really help drive that change forward. And then providing any training to those individuals as well. It really allows you to address employee concerns proactively and provide very regular updates to employees when possible. And then finally, career management and internal mobility. This is creating individual development plans for employees that offer cross-training opportunities, encourage employees to take on stretch assignments, provide mentorships, maybe internally or even externally, and helps to promote from within whenever possible. This is definitely something that employees are looking for right now. Is how can I grow within my job? And it doesn't always mean growing up, right? but how can I expand my skill set and the knowledge that I have and that I bring to the organization? This is just a quick slide about Rehmann. We serve a variety of industries, including all of these listed here, and support organizations in a variety of different areas as well. So if you're ever interested in learning more about Rehmann, please visit our website.